you are the creator of one of the most and some of the most amazing products in the world of sports. I mean, recovery products, right? So where did the idea for Normatec begin? Like, where did that whole concept for those boots come to fruition?
Good. Yeah, so the company was actually originally started back in the day by my late mom, Dr. Laura Jacobs, and she
Okay.
was a medical physician and PhD bioengineer, so like an MD, PhD type.
Okay.
And she created the product to help patients after breast cancer surgery that were having swollen arms. It's a really debilitating issue called lymphedema that isn't a very sexy disease, but something that affects millions of people. And she wanted to get better results for her patients. So she came up with this better mousetrap because these pumps have been around since the 1960s, but created a new technology of how to move fluid through the massaging action that we patented. And then I came out of college and I said, there's got to be something in sports. And she said, good luck and let me know how it goes. And the rest is history.
So you're out of college, and were you into sports when you were in college? Like, how did you know to take this to that level?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It was kind of a factor of a couple of things. One, I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I was never a big school person. I barely graduated from state school in communications and kind of was struggling in a very academic oriented family to find, what I wanted to do in life. I still don't know what I want to do in life. And, you
Welcome.
know, yeah, right. I think anybody
Nobody
who knows what
does.
they want to do in life, that's suspect. You got to watch out for
That's
those people.
amazing. Yeah, totally.
But I always wanted. She said to me, kid, listen, you're my son. If it's a job you want, you got it. But if it's a career, you're going to have to work harder than anybody else because nepotism stops with the opportunity in my book.
Right.
And after I looked up the word nepotism, I realized like, okay, she's onto something here. And I did every job in the company to kind of learn. I was really excited about that. And when this opportunity came up to branch out, I think, I was always into sports to some degree, played some club stuff, rowed a little bit. In fact, our CFO, Christian Pearson, and I used to row in college together. He was a year older than me. As a novice guy on the crew team, he hazed me pretty good back in the day when you were allowed to haze, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It was amazing. I got some great stories on that front. So now I get to pay him back every day, is
Yeah.
what I like to call it. But there was just an interesting opportunity. I knew I wanted to do something in the world of athletics. I tried athletic training for classes for a couple semesters, but it just wasn't my thing. And it didn't hit. It didn't really hit initially for a couple of years. So we really just
Yeah.
one opportunity, create another opportunity, and then from there we just kind of slugged it out.
When did the first Normatec boots like come to market? Right, and
Yeah,
they started as boots, right? Like I'm not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we started originally as arms for the patients with lymphedema, but what the company quickly realized is that if we're helping circulation, all the other stuff kind of flows, right? I mean, arm circulation, leg circulation, it's all body. So
Right.
we recognized that there was a huge potential on the patient front with patients with poor circulation from diabetic wounds. Stuff, weeping wounds, just really bad venous insufficiency, bad venous blood return. So the body wants to bring it down with the arteries, but then gravity, either you're sedentary or you're just getting older and your body just doesn't work quite as well, and you have some other, diseases. Your body doesn't recycle the blood quite as
Right.
efficiently, and you have these puddled ankles. We've always seen grandmas like, "Oh man, what's going on with those ankles in a wheelchair? I'm never going to be like that." But I'm sure she said the same thing, 60 years before,
Yeah.
and it's because we don't have good venous blood return. So we kind of moved in that direction. So it was arms and legs, and then we eventually came out with the hip component.
Okay. And so talk to me a little bit about the patented compression technology and what's happening, because you kind of touched upon it, when you were talking about like what it was originally used for and how it evolved. Just for anyone who's not an athlete listening, who is just like a fitness goer, right? Like if you're an athlete, you've tried Normatec boots, you've tried compression therapy, you maybe wear compression socks, but talk to me about like what the concept is behind it.
Right. So not all compression is created equal. Like you were saying, compression stocks, that's on one
Yeah.
side of the continuum, kind of more static, aspandagy. If they're too tight to get on, you can't put them on. And if they're not tight enough so that you can get them on, they're actually not necessarily doing kind of as much and they can kind of have a tourniquet effect. Definitely certain applications for it. But What we really zeroed in on, what my mom zeroed in on, and eventually we kind of brought forward was this whole concept of taking compression to the next level, how we can actually move fluids in the most effective and efficient way possible. And it was her brilliance to really look at the body and of the thousands, the millions of things that are going on in our body in every given second. And you're out there, you're a triathlete, you're running, you're swimming, you're biking, whatever it is, right? Um, your body is using certain physiological mechanisms to move fluid in the body. And when you don't have that because you're injured or something's going on, you suffer as a result. So,
Right.
of all the things that are going on in the body, she said, okay, we can't utilize 1,000 of them, but let's look at the top two or three, and maybe we can harness the technology in a way that mimics those. And in fact, it's pretty powerful stuff. It's called biomimicry or mimicking biology. There's some really cool techniques and technologies that are out there that are mimicking kind of natural biology stuff. But what we did is we looked at the body and we said, okay, when you're running, your calf muscle is pulsating and it's moving fluid in the right direction. And that's why if you're in a wheelchair, you're not ambulatory, you have that stagnant fluid, you need that kind of heartbeat down below.
Right.
So that pulsing action made a lot of sense. So she said, okay, write that one on the whiteboard. That's going to be an interesting one. Very dynamic, pulsing, heart movement, like alive. And then she said, in our veins and lymphatic systems that move the waste products up and out after your body uses it, we have these great one-way valves. The arteries don't need it because arteries have a lot of energy, muscle that's pushing, the blood flow from the heart with oxygen and nutrients, but to get it to return alongside the lymphatic channels, which again is that sewer system of the body, we have these one-way valves that as fluid goes up, gravity wants to bring it down, and the one-way valves prevent kind of a backflow. So she's like, all right, one-way valve action, that's really important. And then finally, when food and liquid moves through your gut, it kind of works like a snake-like formation, and that is peristalsis. So pulsing, one-way valves, and peristalsis, and we put it all together, and the pulsing hold release pattern that we ended up coming up with is really the most effective way to move fluids, and you just put it on, you immediately notice it, and it feels tremendous.
What was your first consumer product?
First consumer product wasn't a consumer product. First consumer product was a Normatec device that I put in a different color case to make it look kind of cool and not like grandma's pump. Back in the day, times were really tough. The analogy is everyone grew up with a CRT television, those really big televisions. That's kind of where the technology was for Normatec, kind of that massive size. They still are out there, they still work, but you don't really want to get caught watching one, so to speak, if you can help. That was going back to 07,
Okay.
06, 07, right? So we're coming up, we're getting closer to 20 years every day. It's just kind of wild when you think about it. But I wanted something other than dark blue, so we went orange because the first contact we had was actually at the University of Florida down in Gainesville. And we went down there, and they were winning all these championships, back-to-back basketball championships that year, and football. And at first, it was this tool not for recovery. Recovery really wasn't like a concept. It was, athletes back in the day. What did they do? They took a day off, maybe massage, maybe an ice bath was out there. But you're like, oh, I'm just going to be passive in my recovery, and I'm going to really focus on what nutrition and gear. I'm going to focus on my training and my coaching. Right? Those are the kind of big things. And when we kind of pushed into this world, it wasn't for recovery. We didn't even know about that. It was for injury rehab, for post-operative rehab. So you have an ankle sprain, you have an ACL repair. Let's move that fluid. Let's get back to where we need to be. And then from there, off we go as an athlete, and you're back on the field, you're back into training. It wasn't until 2 years later, teams started to pick it up because we went through the pro and the college teams first, not even multi-sport and endurance. That was later on. And they started picking up 2, 3, 4 for a basketball team. And I'm like, man, you got 15 guys, 15 gals on the team. Like, how many ankle sprains? And they're like, no, we're using it for 2-a-day practices during training camp. And now we realize what we call it. We coined it fresh legs faster, because if we can help circulation when there's a problem, kicking things in the right direction when you're healthy is really easy. And that's a lot of what's being utilized today.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing them because I started doing triathlon, I think in 2014 or 2013, seeing them at a race and just thinking, I don't know if that was your strategy, like when you went from team sports to endurance sports. I saw you first at triathlons, like the brand. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we wanted to start with the pros in kind of NBA, NFL, because that's where the money is, and
Yeah,
growing up and not being into multi-sport and endurance, that's when people think of sports, they think of like basketball, football, hockey, soccer, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But I made some friends in the endurance space, specifically in triathlon, and when that world opened up to me, prior to that, if someone said a triathlete, I'd be like, all right, someone who works out a lot is always sweaty and is always in spandex, which is kind of accurate
yeah,
for the most part, right?
yeah,
But getting into it, you realize just how much, and it really, obviously, the longer distance you go, the half Ironman, the Ironman distances, the more you have to put into your training, your nutrition plans, and everything else. But if you're a dedicated athlete, you're putting in some serious amount of time, even in the sprint and Olympic distance. And what I recognized early on about that is not only are these athletes at an older age putting in a lot more time. Most basketball players aren't 50, right? I mean,
right.
even the guys down at the YMCA are not crushing it and like, I'm a basketball player first and I'm a stockbroker second. Like,
I mean, there's still Tom Brady doing football, and he's
still
like,
Tom Brady, yeah, until he retired for a second time. But and those guys are out
yeah,
there, and
hard,
in
yeah,
fact, early adopters of it in the pro sports for more of the mainstream sports, NFL, NBA, were the older guys on the team who wanted to get one
yeah,
more contract, who
yeah,
wanted one more season, two more seasons, try to eke out a little bit more. And they were early adopters. The 18-year-old kids back then were like, oh, my legs got me here. I'm good. Like, remember what it was like when you were 18? You
yeah,
can run forever. Um,
totally.
but in triathlon, we recognize that people are very dedicated in a huge way, and they spend a lot of time and money on their sport and on gear, and they're early adopters. And technology is really important. I mean, you look at a pair of zip wheels, you look at or whatever the wheel du jour is, today,
Yeah,
and if someone can spend an extra 2,800 bucks on a pair of wheels, or probably more at this point, to eke out a little bit more in a wind tunnel, that's not even real world scenario, right, with crosswinds and everything else. But if you
yeah.
can get that going, like, man, they're there. They want to do that. It's very
And
different
those
than
are,
basketball.
yeah, and those are age group athletes. Like, we're not even talking pro athletes. Like, all the age group athletes that are trying to come in first in their age group are on those wheels and spending all that money and time and dedication.
So we got in early on. I befriended a few people, as I mentioned, in the triathlon world, and
Yeah,
I was lucky enough. This was in '07, '08. I got introduced to Craig Alexander, Crowie, right? Three-time Ironman
yeah,
Hawaii full distance Ironman world champion and 70.3 two-time world champion, and just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and great crew around him. And because I'm not a triathlete and I'm 6'2", and I would walk him in, he was like, gee, you're gonna be my driver, my bodyguard this week in Kona. I'm like, done. All right, I didn't know what I was getting into. He's like, we're gonna go to bike check-in. So I'm like walking around, and he was really cool on so many levels. But one of the things he taught me, he was like, you want to learn about technology? I was like, let's do it. He's like, you want to see the coolest and the highest end tech? And I'm like, yeah, like it's got to be in your bike. It's got to be. He goes, no. You look at an age grouper's bike. It's like
yeah.
$12,000 of full tech. He goes, you give me a rusty mountain bike, I'm going to beat them to the top every single time because my engine is better. But when you marry the two, the technology and the fitness and the drive and all the other stuff, that's when really the magic starts to happen. So being in that world really opened my eyes to what people are willing to kind of put themselves through to get the best performance out of their bodies, and it's pretty incredible.
Followed the Normatec brand and business from the early days of seeing the boots at the events to, flash forward now, today, being able to, as a consumer, buy products that, I can have at home, things I can take on the go. Also, obviously, you're at tons of running events and, all those things. But um, talk to me a little bit how you went from like one product to multiple products, and then maybe like how you when you merged and went into business with Hyperice, like that
Yeah,
whole trans.
yeah. So we started off as a medical device company, kept that going as a parallel pursuit. Same kind of concept in terms of using the boots and arm sleeves to help circulation, but very different avenues in terms of who's using it, patient versus athlete, and reimbursement through insurance company, which is very, very challenging, and definitely don't go into that business if you don't have to in life. Versus buying something more in the consumer product lineup, whether it's from Best Buy or your local bike shop or online. And we started to kind of see, probably back in 2012, 2013, 2014, that that's really the path for us. The concept for us back then was, well, can you imagine someone will go ahead and pay you and then you ship? Like, what a novel concept.
Right.
An insurance company that will take 6 months to tell you how much they're not going to pay you. And that really exists. So we kind of decided that was going to be more of our path, and it made a lot of sense. And we knew back then that we had to bring our price point down because it was very
Right.
expensive back then. And we also knew that we couldn't sacrifice quality. And you should see, our board of directors, as most boards do, they're going to hammer you on how do we get every nickel you possibly can out of a customer, and just do whatever you can. And I would just sit there and go, guys, it's not about the dollar. The dollars will come if we come up
Yeah.
with cool technology that's accessible and works. Bring the price point down. The cool thing is that we were able to do all that without sacrificing the quality and the overall performance. And that is something that's a feather in my cap that I carry around and talk about all the time, especially internally with our tech team and our engineers. My guy, Johnny Northrop, who's just such a phenomenal engineer, that was the challenge. How can you bring the price point down without actually sacrificing quality? And we were able to do that. And I kind of made friends with Anthony Katz, the founder of Hyperice. He was in a lot of training rooms. I was in a lot of training rooms. I'd see his stuff, vice versa. He'd see our stuff, and we started connecting up. And the long story short is it made sense, and we were acquired by Hyperice in March 2020, which was really interesting timing.
Yeah.
As the markets were starting to crash, things were closing, and it was a little questionable at first about whether the deal was actually going to happen, but it ended up going through, and it's just been tremendous being able to forge all these really great new relationships. But a lot of the areas that we were really strong in Normatec, Hyperice lacked, and vice versa. So we were able to kind of complement the teams really nicely with that, and start to attack the world as one.
That's great because there is so much value in your products, and which wasn't something I've always been doing, but it really makes a big difference. What's the scope of products that you have?
Yeah, so now in my capacity as Chief Innovation Officer for Hyperice, it's pretty cool. I get to sit at the intersection of engineering and sales, to some degree manufacturing, and I know just enough about each one of those to be dangerous, but being able to be the connective tissue between those
Right.
departments is kind of where I try to shine. We looked at the various silos of the technology that's out there, and we really recognized that percussion made a ton of sense, and that's the Hypervolt line.
Right.
With Hypervolt products, and they were, kind of the originators in the space with it, and it's just done tremendous stuff. And the technology that's in there and the quality of the stuff that's in there is just really great. And that's really great in a lot of different areas. But we recognize that, and that's why the acquisition happened with Normatec, that you can kind of loosen stuff up with the Hypervolt, but to kind of flush it out, Normatec is, where you want to be. So that made a lot of sense. And then obviously on the thermal side, we didn't want to forget about temperature, because temperature does some really cool things. So
Yes.
we have a great thermal line called the Venom that's using heat and some vibration. We have back wraps and knee and shoulder and elbow. And we have these great things called the Venom Go, which kind of looks like an index card that's a reusable sticky pad, and you can stick it really anywhere on your body. And there's a little pod, looks like a pair of AirPods, kind of just to give an idea of sizing, and it kind of attaches on magnetically and gives you some heat and vibration in that spot. And then we acquired a company a few years ago that had this unbelievable technology, and all of the folks who started over there are now working at Hyperice and part of the tech team on engineering, and they're just tremendous, doing some really cool stuff. But that was a technology, everyone knows instant heat. That's easy. Heat the steering wheel,
Right.
heat the blankets. Instant cold is impossible. You either need a
Yeah.
refrigerant, you need ice and cold water, you need to stick it in the freezer. Instant cold just doesn't happen. Well, these guys figured out instant cold. And so we have this device called the Hyperice X, which was also the 10-year anniversary of Hyperice. We came out with this product, so that's another reason why we called it X. And it's a knee wrap, and it does hot or cold or contrast. so you can kind of get both. So looking at various percussion, vibration, looking at heat, and looking at compression made a lot of sense, and we feel like it's the best bang for your buck depending on what you're looking to get into.
So you're behind all the innovation of these products. Like that's your role as after the acquisition, like coming into this company, continuing to develop all the products.
Yeah, me and some really great folks on the engineering team for sure.
And so what are some things that are coming down the pipeline that you see happening as far as since you're in innovation, in terms of the products that you have at Hyperice?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't really talk about our pipeline too much for all the obvious reasons, but we're constantly looking at how we can improve the overall athlete experience. What technology is out there? What can we continue to develop into a form factor and price profile that works for athletes so that they can really just use technology to enhance what they're already doing each and every day to get the most out of their bodies. So looking at thermal and deploying that in different ways, compressing, deploying that in different ways, in different form factors is really interesting for us for sure. While we are also staying true to our roots, which is coming out with really great stuff that really works, that's good quality, and has a price that you can actually afford. And it's interesting because people will look, $7.99 for the Normatec boots now, and they're like, "Well, that's a lot of money, right?" Some people say that. Other people
Yeah.
who have been around will say, "Well, wait a second, you used to be 4 grand."
Yeah.
Back when 4 grand actually meant something, pre-inflation, and the technology has actually gotten better while it's gotten smaller and much less expensive. So
Yeah.
it's just pretty cool. And when you actually break down the price per use of a session versus the overall cost, it actually, really just makes a lot of sense. You're like, wow, that's like $1.50 a massage. Like, I can
Right.
do that, and I can farm that out to some friends and get some pizza and beer out of it, and off we go.
You're like, come over and use my Normatec boots. Yeah. I mean, I think they're awesome. So I was just looking to see because I was like, oh, you should just make one for the foot, like just for like people who have plantar fasciitis. I mean, I don't know if that would actually work. And since I'm not on the innovation team, I'm like, this is what I want is like just for my foot. Like, but actually, I
This
mean,
is how
obviously the legs, yeah,
Listen, Marnie, this is how stuff starts. Someone has an idea. It could be a good idea or a wacky idea. And that
yeah,
was always my thing. Back in the day, we used to have this big whiteboard in my office, and any idea would get thrown up there. Um, I remember one time an athletic trainer in the NBA that shall, remain nameless was like, oh, so gee, if you're going to do this, the Normatec, we didn't have a battery back then in the device, needs to be plugged into the wall. Then you need to put a cell phone charger inside your device so that someone doesn't, if they only have one outlet. I'm like, well, every
right,
outlet is, duplex, so it comes with two to begin with. But okay, if that's really what you want, I threw it up on the board. It didn't come to fruition. There's so many reasons not
yeah,
to do that. But and it really wasn't useful. But that's a really great question. And the question is, would you be? Is it that you're trying to get something that's even a smaller form factor because that's the one area you're trying to get less expensive, and then you start kind
yeah.
of looking at all of that, and you Venn diagram that stuff with all of the how many people out there are actually struggling with this and what are they currently using to kind of combat some of the challenges that they have. And does this make sense? Do you want to come up with something that just for one single issue that once you get
Right.
past it, is there a maintenance thing with it, or can we say,
That's
hey,
true.
you actually
Yeah.
get some plantar action out of the boots, and by the way, after you navigate through that, you can use it for your general fatigue and recovery forever. So off you
That is
go.
true. That is true. I was looking for like the smallest thing possible to shove in my suitcase. But yeah, no, the boots are awesome. And plus, they're at so many of the races, like you are there with the brand. So it's like people can get in there. Yeah. Are you
Yeah,
still doing that?
yeah, we're doing our best, and there's a lot of races out there, a
Yeah.
ton of races, which is so cool. I mean, we used to be Ironman North America kind of sponsors, and now we're kind of global, and that's just with an Ironman, let alone all the
Right.
other race series that are out there and different sports. But we talk about that a lot. For me, that always made a ton of sense to get out in front of people, to get their feedback, to get it on them, to provide a service, but also, what better way? You're a captured audience. You're in the boots, right? You're not going
Right.
anywhere. And I can talk your ear off for 10, 15 minutes. Most people end up like
Totally.
wanting to stay longer.
Yeah.
And, they love it. And you put it on, you feel it immediately. It's one of those great things that it's a product that you don't have to like wonder, is it working? Like, instantaneously.
Yeah.
And for us, every time we can get the product on someone, both Normatec and the other really great
Hyper.
Hyperice line products, our sales, conversion is just so much higher because you
Yeah.
feel it and you experience it, and it makes sense.
It's a game changer. And so now, speaking of sports and athletics, what's your workout? Like, what do you do to stay healthy and fit?
Oh man, I'm running after a 3 and a 5-year old. We'll do it. Definitely pulling some hamstrings these days, just bending down,
Yeah.
picking up tools. Man, 40 is not what I thought it was going to be. It's
It's
yeah.
not, it's like, it's good and it's bad. It's just like, all the things that people tell you when you're younger that you didn't listen to, like you should have done them. That's what I learned at 40.
Like,
Like,
enjoy your knees, right? And
yeah,
someone said
totally.
that
Like
to me.
all the
I'm like, what are
things
you
that
talking
you're
about?
like,
These are great. I had this
yeah,
basketball coach in high school, and I used to rollerblade and like jump off of, 5, 6, stairs high, and not crazy tricks or anything, but just for me it was crazy. And he's like, man, you should really protect your knees. I'm like, what are you talking about? These things are indestructible. And
yeah.
just going up for a layup these days, you definitely feel it. You know, I kind of ebb and flow, if I'm being honest, with various workouts. I'm doing some stuff, kind of more functional fitness in the gym these days. But what I do for recovery is just in front of the TV, we have a little setup with just, some Normatecs and some Hypervolts. And I like to venom back with heat and Normatec boots at the same time, because you get
Mm-hmm.
two one, and it's tremendous. And now with the Normatecs being, so quiet, you can do it while you're watching TV, and it doesn't annoy my wife too much.
Yeah.
So she's in it. We're lucky enough to have two pairs sitting there, so sometimes we'll do dueling boot sessions. Yeah, I mean, just trying to figure out. And that was another big thing when we were getting going. Is great you've come up with something. One idea was great that we've come up with something that works, that is kind of easy to use, that isn't going to break the bank. But now you actually have to find time to do it and actually implement it.
Right.
And we're not creating more hours in the day. So how can we figure that out? And being able to do it while you're also watching TV and on email and maybe picking up a phone call. So this is like the fourth thing that you're doing in that moment in a very active way, but in a passive setting, made a lot of sense. And I think it's one area where we shine for sure.
Like everything that happens when I come back from a run or a ride. But it is essential that it doesn't require like another step of like being somewhere else isolated, having to set aside time just to do that.
I'm really curious what's going to happen, because if you look back at our parents and grandparents' generation, back in the day, you took a long distance phone call, like you were good for the week, right?
Yeah,
That was
totally.
like a big thing. Like yeah, I go to work and like, send me a telegram. And now it's like, what's going to happen in 1 or 2 generations from now? Like, are they going to look back and be like, well, you're only doing 6 things at once? Like, you were such a slacker. Or we'll probably have robots to do it for us, who knows? But it's
Yeah.
just interesting to see perspectives, how that
Yeah,
changes
no,
over
it'll
time.
all be in the cloud and people will be like they'll be wearing like the new Apple Meta, heads vision, whatever it's
Yeah,
called,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, that
goggles, and
VR
they'll be
stuff.
like just sitting in a chair, not doing anything.
Well, that
It'll
Zuckerberg's
all be in
vision,
the
maybe it'll come true.
metaverse.
Who knows?
Yeah, totally. How do you see, Hyperice and Normatec in the metaverse? No,
Whoa,
seriously, how do you see that happening?
that is really interesting.
It's
I don't
not in
even
my
think
questions. Your PR person is like jumping in here to kill me now.
I've never.
I don't know.
PR, not PR. I love that question. I rarely get a question that I haven't been asked before. I don't even know that I've even thought about that personally. I mean, to some
Yeah,
degree, it's such a new space that when it first came out a year or two ago, and Zuckerberg was up there trying to preach, like, do this, and people were speculating they were buying like virtual land for $40,000. I'm just like, all
yeah.
right, this is not going to go anywhere. And I still think the technology has a ways to go. Where does it go from there? I don't know. I mean, I guess the question is, I'll share this with you. So the answer is I don't know, but I'll
Yeah,
give you more
I don't know
wording
either.
around that just to fill in the
Yeah,
time, I guess. When my mom started the company. This is like a flooding back. I haven't thought of this in like 15 years. When my mom started the company, the early days, before we had a product, before we had investors, before we were even a company, and we were just a back of a napkin sitting around at a coffee shop. I wish I still had that napkin. It was just as the dot-com bubble. It was like early 2000, like 2000 was the first concept of this. Like maybe one day, who knows, what would this even look like? And she would go to investors. And investors would say, well, is it internet based? And she's like, no. It's like, well, we're only interested in internet based stuff. She's like, but a
Yeah.
diabetic wound isn't internet based. Like I don't like if you still have a body, you still have a body. Like I don't know, maybe we'll pump people in the metaverse when they I don't know fall off a cliff or something. I don't know what was going to happen there.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But the answer probably is, really great recovery for people who are sitting there in a headset for 15 hours a day. You might as well be, mobilizing that circulation. So when you actually put the headset down, you might have a headache, but you'll be feeling pretty good.
You could do like a head device that goes under the headset that like cools and heats your head and compresses your brain.
Whoa, now we're talking. Write that.
You obviously are a tried and true entrepreneur. I mean, this is your family business that, your mom started, that you took over, that you then merged, and there was an acquisition with Hyperice and all of these things. What are some big lessons that you've learned along the way that are like really things that stick with you every day?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's so cliche to say like never give up, but like, one thing is that no matter what your industry is, if you're successful, you've either been given that success, you've been given money by somebody who's been successful, or you've created it yourself, right? That's typically
Right.
most people don't just win the lottery by scratching off a scratch off, although that would be pretty epic. Um, if you've been given it, you're not going to have that perspective as someone who's actually built it, which most entrepreneurs have. If you've built it, you know that you might say like, oh yeah, this just happened, but like it took 20 years to just like be an overnight success. You're going to come up against so many things that are going to be soul crushing,
Mm-hmm.
and the thought of there's no way I can navigate past this. There's just no possible way that I'm going to be able to see tomorrow, see next week. My mom used to have a saying. I learned a lot of stuff about, medical and other things to be able to, do the business from her, but a lot of the business truisms, we like to call it, when she and I would brainstorm in college, when everyone else was going out and having fun, I would spend 2 to 3 hours a night on the phone with my mom, just debriefing. She would use me as a sounding board, even though I probably had nothing good to say back then because I was just, a 19-year-old kid running around. But little did I know she was probably grooming me, unbeknownst to her even. She was kind of grooming me. And I actually paid a lot of attention. But there were so many moments when we didn't think we were going to make it. And she would have this saying, which is 2 more weeks, just 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks, we're going to hear back about XYZ. 2 more weeks, we're going to get the new prototype in. 2 more weeks, this person's going to start in this new position and it's going to alleviate all these concerns that we have. 2 more weeks, the financing round's going to hit. Like another 2 weeks, just keep pushing. No matter what, keep pushing. And I think Churchill had a good saying, which was like, never, ever, ever don't give up or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's true. You just got to keep pushing no matter what, even though it's really tough. And the other thing I would say is, if you create something that is good for people, I think that carries a lot of weight with it and something that people resonates with them. And something that hopefully will make your life a little bit easier as you're kind of navigating in a new venture, because you always have that to kind of come back to, saying,
Yeah.
I'm having a hard day, I'm having a hard week, I'm having a hard month, but I'm doing this, for the right reasons. And again, hopefully the money will come. Usually people are successful, not just financially, but they're creating something that's positive, especially if it's for other people. And then the sales will come, and whatever your idea of success is will ultimately, hopefully, eventually happen. But if you can do it for the right reasons when times are really tough, that's something you can always come back to and kind of grounds you to some degree, I think.
Yeah. And then are there any like business books that you've read that are really awesome that you would share? Or any books, actually. I do like rapid fire books, shows.
Yeah, I am not the biggest reader. I'm a voracious news reader. I read a ton of news every day of knowing what's going on, whether it's CNBC or Drudge or CNN, Fox, all perspectives. Um, but I read a book when I was in ninth grade, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Also because it was one of the few books that I probably have actually read in life, and I'm not proud of that. It just doesn't. I don't know. My ADD kicks in or whatever it is,
I
and
have
I
a
just.
hard time reading too. Like I
Well,
have
you
a
have a
hard
lot
time
of
reading.
books behind you, and I'm sure some
I
you
know.
probably
I read
wrote.
them like
So
this. Like I read them really fast. Like
well, that's
it's not,
awesome.
yeah, it's not like I'm not really absorbing a ton of information. A lot of the time I'm reading them because someone's coming on the show. I haven't like read, I read a lot of nonfiction, but I haven't really sat down and like read a book.
And dove into it. Yeah.
Yeah, in a long time. Yeah.
But the book I read in ninth grade, it just kind of started me on this path. And I recognize now that being able to connect with people, whether it's a business associate, whether it's somebody who's potentially going to invest in your company, whether it's a random person in a triathlon who's dripping with sweat and snot and has an orange in one hand and a Gatorade in the other and just wants to maybe get in your boots and you have to like talk to them and you want to talk to them and how do you convince them and all that stuff. So
Right.
this book guy Dale Carnegie, many people have heard about it, but it's really worth a read if you haven't read it before. How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it
Yeah.
just for me reshaped like, wow, there's a way to connect with people that maybe I wasn't taught by my parents or in school because you don't get taught that stuff in school.
Yeah. No.
Um, and for me, that kind of started me on my journey of how to really connect with people in a way that made a lot of sense to me, and it's served me well.